season so far and appreciate you taking the time to join the Circular Economy Coalition's joint webinar with the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. Today, we're going to be talking about some industry perspectives on elevating circularity, while also giving a preview of the CEC's new report on the federal government's efforts on circularity. As we head into 2025 with a new administration in Congress, we thought it would be helpful to put together a webinar that shares some perspectives on the state of circularity today and where we think it's headed. Building a circular economy has never been more important as we look to build stronger domestic resiliency across supply chains and products. While there is still some uncertainty as to what this next administration will prioritize, we believe this is an opportunity for the private sector and forward-thinking companies to drive this next era of circularity that will produce benefits not just for our country and sustainability goals, but across the value chain as well. I'd like to introduce Michael Van Brunt, the Circular Economy Coalition Chair and Vice President of Environment and Sustainability at ReWorld, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you all for attending, and thanks again for your patience as we work through the technical issues. The CEC was founded a little over a year ago to tackle growing issue of waste in the United States. We're a coalition of private sector companies, municipal agencies, all advocating for federal and state governments to better encourage and incentivize circular economy across industries and develop stronger policies to increase efficiency. Today, as many of you probably know, our economy is largely linear. We extract materials and resources, process them into products, use them for a finite period of time, and largely discard them at the end of the life. This model has significant impacts on society, environment, including contributes to climate change and resource inefficiency. A more circular economy would fundamentally change this model, preserving resources at their highest possible value for as long as possible through reuse, recycling, energy recovery, all with the goal of reducing environmental and social impacts for the entire life cycle. Circular economy is not an end of itself, but really a means for us to help reduce impacts. Not only is circularity good for the environment, it makes good economic sense for the nation, our companies, and communities. Our mission as the CEC is to promote a more circular economy through practical and sustained action and sound public policy. The results in measurable improvements to environmental economic outcomes, including clean air and water, greater domestic resource and energy efficiency, and economic benefits to our communities. So with that introduction, I'll turn it back over to Sean.
Thank you so much. And I'll also mention that we have Dave Valero from the Circular Economy Coalition on this call today, who is Executive Director of the York County Solid Waste and Refuse Authority in Pennsylvania. I'd like to now turn to Lisa Jacobson, who we have partnered with, as she's the Executive Director of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, to introduce her members on this panel.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you, and this is such an important topic. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy focuses on energy, but I think the word before it is the critical one. It's sustainable, and looking at the full life cycle of both our energy system, but our entire economy is fundamental. So I'm really proud that we have three outstanding board members for the Business Council for Sustainable Energy as a part of this webinar. And we've been really excited to watch how CEC has been established and are very appreciative of the report that has been released. I think we're going to learn a tremendous amount from it as we're preparing for the next Congress, but also thinking about what can be done at the state and local level. So I want to commend ReWorld and you, Mike, for your work, and obviously the entire team that's working at CEC. So from the BCSE side, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy side, we are going to hear, as we're discussing what the report is sharing and what we need going forward, from three leaders. Mark Lessons, Senior Director of Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs for Johnson Controls. Vanessa Miller-Fells, Vice President of Climate and Environment for Schneider Electric. And I hope Heller Walter Terranoni can join us as well. She's Director of Global Climate Policy with Trane Technologies. So I'll turn it back to you, Sean. Thanks for having us join you in this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'll set the table a little bit for everyone and turn it over to Mike. As we released a new federal audit of circularity programs and grants within the federal government. I'll turn it over to Mike to share a little bit about that, but you will be able to find the report on our website, uscecoalition.org, and we'd be happy to share it with you as well. So, Mike. Please share a little bit about it.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So when we first started on this effort, I personally was not really quite sure what we were going to find out. You never know when you sort of approach a question like this, what sort of rabbit holes you might wind down in. So it's really a very interesting process. Our goal of this first report was to really take stock of where the federal government stands on circularity. We intend that this is sort of an annual exercise, but this was sort of a good initial look into 5 federal agencies. We looked at Department of Energy, US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, which might be pretty obvious ones from a circularity standpoint. But we also looked at USDA, Department of Agriculture, the General Services Administration, as well as the National Institute for Science and Technology, or NIST. And we looked not only specifically at circularity, but we wanted to look a little bit broader than that too, and looking not at just where circularity is explicitly included, but then also where circularity concepts may be emerging in policies, grant exercises, and the like in the federal government. In summary, I think we were really pleased to see that there was a consistent value being placed on circularity in the government. The 5 agencies that we took a look at all had incorporated circularity to some degree into their program activities. With grants in particular, 2 things which have been really pretty fundamental are both the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act, both of which authorized and released billions of dollars to agencies that ultimately support circularity goals, sometimes by name, sometimes indirectly by sort of focusing on different topics. However, as you might expect, this early into sort of a programmatic development, our review revealed opportunities for enhancing the federal government's approach to circularity to further increase efficiency, promote circularity, and help the U.S. emerge as a world leader in promoting circularity. So I'll touch quickly on just a few of the key concepts, recognizing that we got a little bit of a late start. I'll cover these very briefly because I really want to get an opportunity to hear from our experts, both from the CEC as well as BCSE. So first of all, we think the government could strengthen the connections between circularity and other broad policy goals. And by that, I mean, if we look at sort of the Biden administration, recognizing, of course, this is the outgoing administration, they had set an ambitious goals of achieving a net zero emissions economy by 2050. Looking at climate goals specifically, circularity can be a really important driver in reducing emissions. The World Business Council on Sustainable Development had found that companies in the EU that practice circularity could achieve a 56% emission reduction over a baseline. Similarly, circularity can support other goals, though, including building out domestic supplies of energy, materials, resource energy efficiency, goals of which we think may emerge as sort of priorities of the new administration coming in. One of the things that I always go back to working with the Department of Energy a few years ago, there was an RPE as a part of DOE called the Advanced Research Program Agency for Energy. One of the representatives had an astounding statistic that every year we throw away more metal than we actually make domestically. Getting these materials back into the economy epitomizes circularity and can certainly be an opportunity for the federal government to make that tie a little bit more explicit. And I think that's an important thing to remember too, as we think about circularity. We always think about circularity as a means to an end. So tying it into a broader policy goal makes circularity more sustainable from a policy standpoint. Secondly, I think there's some benefits that could be gained in terms of what our review looked at, incorporating circularity information across the agencies of the government. This could be a coalescing focus area for government, and that's one of the things that our group, the CEC, looks to work with the federal government to see how we can incentivize that and sort of move that along. By setting an example of prioritizing circularity, U.S. government agents can have a really strong effect, serve as a role model for businesses. So many agencies are instituting internal circularity measures. It would be great to see those sort of centralized and coalesced so that we can learn and facilitate learning within the government, but then also between government and public and private agencies. The agencies we did review were off to a great start. And one of the things that we thought would be a really useful tool is to have a single definition of circularity across the government, to allow for sort of more concise and reconciled and symbiotic policies between different parts of the government. For the third one, we took a look at in terms of thinking about how the government, federal government, could take more of a leadership role, not just domestically, but also internationally. That I think will be sort of an interesting topic over the next few years. Without a doubt, circularity is growing momentum on the global stage. The EU adapted a circular economy action plan earlier this year. And one of the things that we always see is that if you're not at the table, your interests don't get represented. That's one of the reasons why Lisa and her group, the CEC, stay engaged with public policy. But it's also a reason why there's a benefit for the federal government staying engaged in international efforts to make sure that the interests of the United States get properly reflected in sort of the policy direction that we see emerge around circularity more globally. Lastly, I think that this probably goes without saying, but I think it's really important given to people who are on this call. We all think that public-private partnerships are going to be critical over the next administration, and always are when we look at sort of how do we leverage federal government activity, involvement, and actually translate that into strong private and local government interaction. So we see that the role of local agencies, whether they be at the county level, such as Dave's organization, or the local, even the municipality level, or at the state level, have a really important role to play when it comes to sort of advancing circularity, serving both as sort of the implementation platform, but also as a really critical advisor to federal policy. With that, I'll turn that back to Sean, so we can move forward and hear from some of our panelists.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate that introspection into the report. And I'd like to now turn to our panel. So with that report in mind, let's explore some industry's perspectives and approaches to circularity, both from the private sector and from municipal agencies. And let us know a little bit about what you're looking to from the federal government and for guidance as well. So with that, I'll start off with Vanessa from Schneider Electric. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad I was able to make it despite the challenges, the tech challenges. It's funny, that's 4 years after COVID. Sometimes it still takes a few minutes to log on a Zoom call. I think this was really insightful what you both shared, and very much aligned with how we're thinking about the circular economy potential. You mentioned some numbers, and I have some others. 70% of material extracted and used in 2024, for example, would be enough to meet global needs. So this circular business model proposes really an alternative to the dominant linear processes that take, make, and dispose. And I give a few kind of reasons why at Schneider we really did an overall of how we're thinking about circularity. But I think the first challenge that has been a critical one to overcome is circularity doesn't have a standardized definition. And circularity is often taken, it's often understood apart as the whole. So you may think of circularity just the end of life implication, there's just the take back practices. Or you may just think of circularity as the potential, the amount of recycled content that you have in a product. And really what we've been lacking is kind of that life cycle definition. The closest you have obviously is life cycle assessment, but these are not widely adopted, and they're also not completely standardized. So this is really a critical piece where we expect policymakers, and we're seeing a lot of advancement both from the EU and potentially from the US, on clarifying what is circularity and what would be a circular product. When I look at the EU taxonomy, for example, they're the closest to defining what is eco-design and what is a product that is eco-design. But there's more than 60 criteria to get to a product that would be eco-design. And these 60 criteria are not, they're not to choose from. They're all an and an and and an and. So it's extremely cumbersome right now for companies to kind of understand, okay, what is circularity and how do I get to deliver circular products? But I think we're very much aligned on why we should be doing circularity. I mean, first, there is a growing mounting pressure from customers and consumers. I mean, I think we all have studies here, but definitely one of the Accenture surveys that they do every year shows that more than 3/4 of consumers expect to buy more sustainable products in the next 5 years. And more than 85% of customers were interested in buying refurbished products. So we have like huge opportunity as a business to respond to that expectation, but we have also to make very clear what we're selling and be very transparent about what we're selling, which today I feel with this lack of transparency and this lack of standardization around the definition, we may not be selling the same thing, yet making very similar claims. And I think this is also something that the EU is tackling very aggressively with the green claims regulation that's currently in draft, and that really is trying to prevent any attempts from companies at greenwashing. But it's not necessarily voluntary greenwashing. That's the challenge. It's like without standardized definition, you may fall into a greenwashing consideration, but not voluntarily, just because you don't have kind of the right kind of guardrails and definition in place to make sure you're really describing appropriately the qualities, the environmental qualities of your products. The second reason why obviously we need to deliver on circularity is, I mean, at Schneider, we've set net zero commitments. So we have set targets that were validated in 2022 by the Science Based Target Initiative, SBTi. And these targets, these net zero targets are very aggressive. We have to reduce our overall footprint, scope 1, 2, and 3 by 25% absolute from 2021 to 2030. So if you think about the growth also of our business, it's really a significant effort in carbon reduction that we have to deliver across, again, operations, but also a whole value chain. So whether our upstream or downstream, and we're not going to get to these carbon reduction without circularity. Circularity is one of the main levers to achieve a net zero commitment. And obviously what is applicable for Schneider is applicable for the planet. If we want the planet to still be on track to a 1.5, or I don't know if I even should mention 1.5 degree, but let's say a well below 2 degree scenario, we'll need to deploy circularity at scale. The third reason is if there's business demand from the customers, there's also business opportunity. And so I think one number that struck me was the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that estimates that the circular economy could create an additional $1 trillion per year compared to a non-circular economy scenario in 2030, and would yield a number of cost savings to businesses and customers and wider benefits, obviously, to society and the environment. So with that, like, how do we do it at Schneider? Well, as I said, it's really challenging to make sure we're exactly doing everything that makes the circular economy work. But we've tried to simplify the 60 criteria of the EU taxonomy into a trifecta, which really takes into account the whole life cycle of products. And we call it use better, use longer, and use again. So first, use better. Well, we want to make sure then from the inception, from the time we design a product, we are designing out waste and we're using the least material possible, but also the best material possible in designing. So for example, one of our KPI, one of our sustainability impact KPI at Schneider that we report quarterly to investors is a green materials KPI, where we, by 2025, 50% of the volumes of metals and plastics, thermoplastics in our product need to be green. And obviously, you would ask me, what's the definition of green? So we have a methodology. This is audited, but again, we would very much appreciate having standardized methodology of what is a recycled content, what is a recycled steel, what is a green steel, what is a better plastic. And right now, in the lack of these definitions, well, we have to come up with sometimes our definition and continue working with standard bodies and regulators to advance the field. The second one is to use longer, and that's obvious. We need to extend the lifespan of products to forestall the need for new ones. And here, we're very well positioned at Schneider, because maybe I should have mentioned what we sell at Schneider. We are an energy, electrical management and industrial automation company. So we sell large electrical and energy and software solutions to improve the energy systems of the world and to electrify the world. And obviously, most of our products have very, very long lifespan. Most of our products have 20 to 30-year lifespan. But yet, there is still so much more that can be done to ensure the repairability or the serviceability of our products. And here we're working a lot on digitally enabled maintenance and equipment modernization services. So that are really critical also to reduce the carbon footprint of electrical installation. And last, use again, which is sometimes kind of where people zoom in, like the recycling piece, which is to what you said earlier, Sean, like we have to think about circularity as retaining materials at their highest value the longest, and recycling is really the last mile. But use again is absolutely necessary, and to be able to use again materials, we have to make sure that from inception, from design, we've designed them the right way so they can be recyclable and reused. Reused and recyclable at the end of their first life. So here we're having a number of programs, but this is the part that we need to scale the most. We're having a number of programs around take back, refurbishment, and reselling of assets. We have a checked and repacked by Schneider Electric and a refurbished by Schneider Electric programs, and where we track the CO2, the avoided CO2 emissions from our customers and from these solutions. So maybe passing the baton to another speaker.
Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's really great to hear the progress you guys are making and the efforts you guys have made towards circularity. Let me turn to Mark Lessons, Senior Director at Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs at Johnson Controls, and then we'll go to Helen Molter-Terranoni over at Train. So first to you, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and thanks to the broader Circular Economy Coalition for allowing me to come speak today. I think just to start, if you're not familiar with Johnson Controls, we are a comprehensive solutions provider of technology for commercial and industrial buildings and the environment. So think of things like heating, cooling, and ventilation, building controls and management systems, building automation, fire and security, digital solutions, a lot of things that help manage the built environment and certainly drive efficiencies within them. And I'm in a sustainability role at the organization. So I spend a bit of time looking at our carbon footprint across our value chain and making sure that we are in alignment with the targets that we've set, and also looking externally to make sure that we are staying in alignment with what comes next. So there's a lot of overlap between what I do and I would say the concept of the circular economy here. I think if we think about the products and solutions that we have to offer, we're constantly trying to understand what is the life cycle carbon footprint of what we are delivering, and how do we ultimately reduce and eliminate that. I think I won't harp on them, but I think Vanessa did a nice job summarizing some of the challenges and opportunities that we have today, which is, I would say, I go back primarily to a lack of standardization and KPIs, and I think it can become challenging, especially when the concept of the circular economy might actually mean something different to someone else, even when we start talking internally about how do we make the best overall reduction in our impact. I will say, we've made considerable progress in reducing our Scope 3 emissions, but again, there's a I would say, I wouldn't call it a disconnect, but there's definitely a opportunity to better align the way that we do life cycle accounting for carbon and the more broader objectives that we are trying to achieve within the circular economy. And so I'd say this is where I'd say the challenge comes in is I can set KPIs for carbon, and I know how to measure that, even if there's best practices for how we can measure and manage our Scope 3 emissions and understand that across the value chain. There's also there's other ways of measuring other principles within the circular economy, but they aren't completely aligned necessarily with the KPIs that we might have for carbon emissions. And in some instances, you might even have conflicting goals. And so I think part of the challenge, part of the need and the opportunity here is to really clarify what we are trying to do and set those appropriate KPIs for various components of the circular economy, so that we can figure out how that applies to our entire value chain, and then we can do more to optimize our performance, so that as we are choosing to go down paths to reduce our carbon footprint, we are also maximizing the value that we are getting through other important concepts across natural resource preservation and recyclability and reusability, and the reduction of waste, and the ability to keep what we are putting into the economy a part of it in perpetuity. I will say this though, where we have made the most progress to date has, or at least where we have the most measurable impacts and metrics, are not necessarily within the products themselves that we manufacture, but in the packaging that we have used in how we ultimately distribute those products. That's an area that we found quite a bit of overlap between principles like reduction in the use of materials and a corresponding reduction in the carbon footprint that we have. And so, we've been on a real mission within our packaging engineering teams to eliminate the use of single-use plastics, and we've made considerable progress there. And I believe in the past year we've been able to reduce the amount of single-use plastics in our packaging by over 40,000 pounds of single-use plastics just through material substitution, and that does have a profound impact, both in terms of the broader sustainability of the solutions of the packaging that we use, and our carbon footprint. I would say though, the part that the thing that I find even more inspiring than that though is not necessarily around plastic specifically, but when we actually look at the packaging and the pallets that we use to ship pieces of equipment, we've also been focusing on, even though it's a sustainable material, reducing the amount of wood that we use in those packaging materials. There are ways to more efficiently design and utilize the wood that we do use. And so what that has really enabled for us has been an ability to reduce the amount of materials that we use, maximize the reusability of those materials, but also because we're able to ultimately downsize and reduce the weight of the entire product as shipped, we're actually seeing a reduction in less than truckload shipments that we are making across the country and are responsible for. And that it has a direct tie back to how we would account for our Scope 3 emissions when it comes to the transportation and distribution of our products. And so to me, that's a really great example of how we've been able to find a way to align all of those metrics. And I guess my goal in looking forward is, how do we do more of that when it comes to the product and engineering itself? I will say, as we look down the road, we are certainly evaluating life cycle carbon to the extent that we can across our product portfolio, and we're also trying to set KPIs related to the types of materials that we use, a reduction in the weight, a emphasis on recyclability. But the more that we can do to truly align those objectives with the metrics and goals that we already have around the reduction in our carbon footprint, the more efficient we're going to be in executing and delivering on those goals. So I think there's a lot of potential here, and certainly really excited about the progress around standardization, especially when it comes to some of these KPIs. Clearly we have a lot more work to do as we continue to align all of those and make sure that we execute effectively on the strategies that we deploy to improve the broader sustainability of all of the products and solutions that we put back into the economy. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That's fascinating. I really appreciate your insight onto this. I'm going to turn now to Helen Walter-Terranoni, who is the Director of Global Climate Policy at Trane Technologies. Before I do, can I have you turn on your camera, Helen? Just so folks...
You could if it would, Sean.
Oh no, it's one of those technology days that we are just having some fun with, but
No,
that is no problem.
I apologize. I'm in the airport and I didn't expect to be, but the weather has kind of it's been a bit of a week. But thank you so much, Sean, and to the CEC for inviting us to talk about this important topic today. I work for Trane Technologies, like you said, and we we're the a very large player, if not the largest provider of heating and cooling technologies in the world. And as a kind of a global climate innovator, our businesses and brands, they do directly impact carbon emissions. And so one of the areas that we have been focused on, and I think that more and more companies have been around circularity. And as we work to disrupt this supply chain and reverse supply chain that we're also accustomed to, I think we all have a lot of lessons to learn, and your report is a great jumping off place for this, kind of this conversation. One of the things that just to mention, I guess I should mention that we have a net zero goal for 2050 as well as our 2030 goals, but we also have a 40% reduction in embodied emissions goal by 2030. And, our biggest footprint in that space, that our hot spots are steel, aluminum, copper, and refrigerants. And, from that perspective, we we support our suppliers by, purchasing net zero and green steel today, and have been for quite some time. But, if we think about tomorrow, we're going to need to be recycling more of those metals. So we're going to have to see that equipment coming back around again, in addition to components that we need to be thinking about refurbishing components. We may need to be thinking about a second lifetime for equipment. We've got to make sure that we bring it up to energy efficiency levels, and that it meets all the required specifications and the efficacy that equipment is needed to meet. But, all of those levers we're going to all need to start turning to kind of get where we need to be long term. So, some of the other things that, just a couple of statistics to throw out to folks, it's been reported that less than 7.5% of is the circularity share in the world today. And that the opportunity economically is $4.5 trillion by 2030. And so, it's great for the environment. It's great for business. It's great for other stakeholders. It's great for customers. And so, I think that though, as we disrupt the historic take, make, use, dispose thinking, it's got some really great benefits and wins all around. So I won't go on too much, because I think a lot of has been said, but I think your report is just a great place to start thinking about how we advance this in a more substantive and orderly way.
Thank you so much, Helen. Really appreciate it. I'd like to turn now to Dave Valero, who is Executive Director for York County. Let me make sure I get the whole name correctly. York County. Well, I'll let you do it. You corrected me earlier because I had you as a different acronym.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, it's the York County Solid Waste and Refuse Authority. And, as a local government agency charged with the responsible management of the county's waste, by definition, we come into the circularity discussion sort of later in the product life cycle. But our mission really is to squeeze as much value as possible out of the waste that our community discards. And we see this as a critical function of local government, much like just responsible use of tax dollars, right? Waste is a resource that we shouldn't squander. And when you start from this premise that waste is a resource, we open the door to creative ways of thinking about how the resource is best utilized and managed. And it also, we try to apply this principle through the whole way through the material life cycle, from encouraging waste minimization, material reuse and recycling, and energy recovery is needed before disposal of anything. So again, as a local government agency, we should and we do try to take the long view. We want our integrated waste management system to represent and reflect our community's values. So we spend a lot of time and effort trying to educate our community on what we do and why we do it, as well as spending a lot of effort trying to solicit input from the stakeholders. It's a changing landscape, it's a changing public, and their wants and needs are changing, and we're trying to stay abreast of that, and we can reflect it in these systems that take a long time to plan and implement and have a long life cycle. Ultimately, the degree to which we can create a circular economy is going to be based on billions of individual decisions, and we want our community members consciously thinking about the impacts of their consumption and their waste management choices. Again, we find that when we keep the community informed about what it is we do and ask them what they want us to do and why they do make the decisions they make, and what they want to see in the infrastructure that we provide, many of our stakeholders choose actions that enhance circularity and responsible waste management, and they expect us to do the same. We really try to utilize I like to call public-private partnership network approach or model to this. Our organization really serves the community and tries to squeeze the most we can out of the resource through three separate fundamental services. We have a planning function, we provide infrastructure, and we do a lot of public education to help people utilize the infrastructure in the best way. We're legally required as a planner to make sure there's adequate capacity for the county's disposal needs for the long term, and we do that through a mix of private and public sector facilities, mostly that offer capacity in response to our solicitations. By providing publicly owned processing capacity for most of the waste, we help maintain a competitive environment for private haulers who do the vast majority of the waste collection under contracts with our partner, in turn with our partner local municipalities. So, and keeping in mind that collection is the bulk of waste management costs, we feel that keeping this competitive waste collection environment helps to maintain the affordable prices at the curb. We also do things like catalog private sectors, companies who provide sort of boutique circularity services. For example, companies that collect, say, just used oil or light bulbs or batteries, and then we catalog them and we try to connect people, small businesses, and residents with those services, so we can keep their costs down while enhancing circular economy and circularity in those material management. Our facilities are operated by private companies because by leveraging their expertise and their scale, we can provide the best services at the lowest prices. And being able to look long term as a public agency, we can again leverage our scale to really manage costs and provide the highest quality services with the greatest amount of circularity. We kind of find that by using this model, we keep overall waste management costs stable and reasonable, and at the same time facilitate a more circular approach to waste management than maybe you'd see without our presence in this space. So,
thank you so much, Dave. It's good to see how the public sector intersects with the circularity discussion as well. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I know we got a little bit of a late start, and so I'd like to pivot now to kind of a Q&A session where we dive into this topic a little bit more. And so I'll turn to the panel to kind of chime in and share your perspectives on this. The first question is a two-parter. What advice do you have to advance circularity? And second, to focus it a little bit more, how can circularity help drive domestic resiliency in the U.S. economy? So either Mike or Lisa, I was wondering if one of you could take the lead on that, and then we could get some feedback from some of our other panelists as well.
Mike, why don't you start?
All right, thanks, Lisa. Although I was going to offer to do rock, paper, scissors, but that's a lot better. I think you've already heard a little bit from folks, introductory remarks. I think leveraging partnerships. One of the things that I'm always amazed at, and this just came up this week, is you think you have an issue sort of well-defined in your mind, and then you start interacting with the rest of the supply chain. And you realize it's like, okay, that's that reason because of X. And so it winds up being a multidimensional, multidisciplinary problem of how to advance the circular economy. And when you do that, and when you have those partnerships, it works extraordinarily well. It might be more difficult, it might take a little bit longer, but that's where I've seen the biggest benefit is when we're able to sort of do those partnerships. And I would apply that with the federal government, working with private entities. I think you heard Dave sort of talk about how, he utilizes public-private partnerships quite a bit. Those things can work because it really brings a good breadth of expertise to the table. Lisa, anything else you'd add?
Well, I mean, I think definitely this discussion of, common understanding, common definitions, clarity in the whole conversation on circularity is needed. You hear that at all levels of the conversation. And I also think there's that opportunity for partnership and collaboration. So the key is to get enough clarity, but as Vanessa was discussing, we don't want to overburden this to the point where it's just unworkable. And so you have to find that sweet spot. And it's not dissimilar from a lot of other challenges we are trying to face. As Mark said, we kind of went through this with greenhouse gas management or other air quality issues, and we're not done with those yet either. We're still working to improve, but it's not surprising that is an issue that comes up. And then, just on resilience, I mean, obviously, we're in an environment now where we're going to need more optimized and expanded energy services, just looking at it from the BCSE window, but then extrapolating that throughout our economy. This makes, anytime we're avoiding waste, we're using things more efficiently, we're utilizing new technologies, we have sustainability and circularity in mind. We're going to have more opportunity, and we're going to, have improved infrastructure, which is going to make our economy more resilient, not to mention buildings and, other public benefits and public services, as we heard from Dave, more affordable and more secure.
Thanks so much, Lisa. It kind of leads into the next question. I'll turn to Mark, Vanessa, and Helen for this. What barriers are you currently facing when adopting circular practices, and what policies would increase the adoption of circular practices within your industry? Kind of a two-parter once again. Mark, I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I view this, I suppose, more of an opportunity here, and I'll lean a little bit on the response to the previous question, which I think, when we look at the goals of the goals of the circular economy and sustainability more broadly, I'd say, most of the actors in the value chain, we all have really similar overlapping goals, but we need to better understand, again, using metrics and appropriate KPIs, how do we continue to advance in a way or optimize in a way that makes sense for everybody. And so I think, to the extent that we can improve communication across the value chain, and I would also say make sure that members of the value chain are valuing the types of metrics that we are optimizing around. I think that's ultimately how we do this. And so again, I'd lean on the example of greenhouse gas emissions management, but it can be expanded well beyond just GHG emissions. We just have to all make sure that we're talking the same language, and then figuring out how do we optimize around all of those things. It's a aspirational goal that I'm not sure I'm coming with a specific policy recommendation here, other than to say that the more that we can be clear about ultimately what we're trying to accomplish, the more opportunities we'll have to then go try to tackle those challenges.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. Vanessa, Helen, do you have anything to add on this topic about barriers that you're currently facing when adopting circular practices?
Sure, I can chime in if it's helpful. So a couple of different things. One, there are policies that kind of look at that reverse supply chain, like for example, refrigerants. And this is kind of an international issue rather than a national one, because I think EPA has done a really good job of addressing this, but internationally, used refrigerant is viewed as a waste, and it's not allowed to be shipped between jurisdictions for reuse under the Basel Convention. So there are like policies that limit the transport and reuse of products, and so for reuse, and so that's one. I think another one that we should all we need to start thinking about is making sure that products that are reused or resold, or even components that are reused or resold, are kind of up to the levels where we need them to be as a society from an energy efficiency perspective, and so that second users or second tier users can kind of expect great quality products and outcomes. And then finally, I think that I would just encourage companies and and municipalities and subnational, national governments to think about start and grow, right? Like, so you can start thinking about circularity, like the embodied carbon perspective, or the packaging example that Mark gave, and some of the examples that Vanessa gave. That you can start now and grow while we're trying to figure out how we measure everything, right? You don't have to wait for that. So it would encourage people to do that, and leading by example, I think, for companies and governments is a great way to kind of get this motion forward. So Sean, that's kind of what I would think about.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen. And Vanessa, really quickly, as one of the last ideas you may have, then we're going to have to wrap up. So thank you so much, Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of things. The last thing we maybe didn't cover is infrastructure and innovation. For example, if I think of how do you make plastic recyclable, you maybe have to look at different types of mechanical recycling, and there's just not enough infrastructure currently. Or you have to look at designing plastics without some PFAS or some specifically substances of very high concern, like flame retardants. And so it's just like, how do we innovate to find alternatives that are actually recyclable, that can be reused and handle properly at the second life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we're tying this back together. It's one of the reasons we released this report, was really to find out what the federal government is doing and where some of those weak spots are, what some of those barriers are, but also then where are the opportunities. And so for our viewers out there, we are going to be looking to release this report annually. And this year was just the first benchmark as to where circularity is in the federal government right now. And so we look forward to sharing new iterations and building upon this first report to really advance circularity nationwide. So you can find the report on our website at www.uscecoalition.org. And you can also reach out to me anytime at Sean, SEAN, @smartpolicygroup.com.